Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, Force over here and welcome back to another reading live stream. I was trying to do this a few moments ago, but I kept feeling like I was gonna, I kept forgetting where I was at and stuff. So I decided to get something to eat real quick, which I did. Just had a bit of a donut. It was good. Glazed donut, if anybody's ever wondering what kind of donut I was eating. Excuse me. And so yeah. But anyway, we're back, and I gotta stop trying to burp, you know. But anyway, so we're back now, and we're reading the book that, as you can tell from the title, is Psycho by Robert Bloch. This is the 65th anniversary edition of said book. The book came out in 1959. This year marks 65 years since it came out. But the movie I'll be watching, whether it's after this book reading or tomorrow or whenever I do it. That version of Psycho will be turning 65 years old next year in 2025 because the movie came out in 1960, the year after the book was published. And that movie was directed by none other than the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. But we'll get to that movie watching when we get to it because it is part of the 31 Nights of Halloween horror movies that I wanted to do for this year. But in any case, we're going to go ahead and get started with the book so that way we can, because I want to see, because this book is actually 175 pages long, and I want to see if I can actually get to the very end of it without having to do multiple streams across it. But we'll see what happens. Even if I have to stop at least midway through the story to stop for the stream and then come back to it at a later date, that's fine too. Whatever. Either way, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So without further ado, let's begin. I also got some pop in case I ever need a drink. Alright, but anyway. Chapter 1. Psycho by Robert Bloch. 10% of this book is dedicated to Harry Altschuler, who did 90% of the work. Psycho. Hmm. Chapter 1. Norman Bates heard the noise and a shock went through him. It sounded as though somebody was tapping on the window pane. He looked up, hastily, half prepared to rise, and the book slid from his hands to his ample lap. Then he realized that the sound was. We gotta set the mood. We gotta set the mood. Hold on a second. If the rain set. That's probably a bit loud. Hold on a second. There we go. Then he realized that the sound was merely rain. Late afternoon rain, striking the parlor window. Norman hadn't noticed the coming of the rain nor the twilight, but it was quite dim here in the parlor now, and he reached over to switch on the lamp before resuming his reading. It was one of those old-fashioned table lamps, the kind with the ornate glass shade and the crystal fringe. Mother had had it ever since he could remember, and she refused to get rid of it. Norman didn't really object. He had lived in this house for all the 40 years of his life, and there was something quite pleasant and reassuring about being surrounded by familiar things. Here everything was orderly and ordained. It was only there, outside, that the changes took place. And most of those changes had a potential threat. Suppose he had spent the afternoon walking, for example. He might have been off on some lonely side road or even in the swamps when the rain came. And then what? He'd be soaked to the skin, forced to stumble along home in the dark. You could catch your death of cold that way, and besides, who wanted to be out in the dark? It was much nicer in here in the parlor, under the lamp, with a good book for company. The light shone down on his plump face, reflected from his rimless glasses, bathed the pinkness of his scalp beneath the thinning sandy hair, as he bent his head to resume reading. It was a fascinating book. No wonder he hadn't noticed how fast the time had passed. It was The Realm of the Incas by Victor W. von Hagen, and Norman had never before encountered such a wealth of curious information. For example, this description of the Kachua, or victory dance, where the warriors formed a great circle, moved and writhed like a snake. He read, quote, "The drumbeat for this was usually performed on what had been the body of an enemy. The skin had been flayed and the belly stretched to form a drum, and the whole body acted as a sound box while throbbings came out of the open mouth. Grotesque but effective." Norman smiled, then allowed himself the luxury of a comfortable shiver. Grotesque but effective. It certainly must have been. Imagine flaying a man, alive, probably, and then stretching his belly to use it as a drum. How did they actually go about doing that, curing and preserving the flesh of the corpse to prevent decay? For that matter, what kind of a mentality did it take to conceive of such an idea in the first place? It wasn't the most appetizing notion in the world, but when Norman half closed his eyes, he could almost see the scene. This throng of painted naked warriors, wriggling and swaying in unison under a sun-drenched savage sky, and the old crone crouching before them, throbbing out a relentless rhythm on the swollen, distended belly of a cadaver. The contorted mouth of the corpse would be forced open, probably fixed in a gaping grimace by clamps of bone, and from it the sound emerged, beating from the belly, rising through the shrunken inner orifices, forced up through the withered windpipe to emerge amplified and in full force from the dead throat. For a moment Norman could almost hear it, and then he remembered that rain had its rhythm too, and footsteps. Actually, he was aware of the footsteps without even hearing them. Long familiarity aided his senses whenever Mother came into the room. He didn't even have to look up to know she was there. In fact, he didn't look up. He pretended to continue his reading instead. Mother had been sleeping in her room, and he knew how crabby she could get when just awakened. So it was best to keep quiet and hope that she wasn't in one of her bad moods. "Norman, do you know what time it is?" He sighed and closed the book. He could tell now that she was going to be difficult. The very question was a challenge. Mother had to pass the grandfather clock in the hall in order to come in here, and she could easily see what time it was. Still no sense making an issue of it. Norman glanced down at his wristwatch and smiled. "A little after 5, he said. "I actually didn't realize it was so late. I've been reading. Don't you think I have eyes? I can see what you've been doing." She was over at the window now, staring out at the rain. "And I can see what you haven't been doing too. Why don't you turn the sign on when it got dark? And why aren't you up at the office where you belong?" Well, it started to rain so hard, and I didn't expect there'd be any traffic in this kind of weather. Nonsense! That's just the time you're likely to get some business. Lots of folks don't care to drive when it's raining. But it isn't likely anybody would be coming this way. Everyone takes the new highway. Norman heard the bitterness creeping into his voice, felt it welling up into his throat until he could taste it, and tried to hold it back. But too late now. He had to vomit it out. I told you how it would be at the time, when we got that advance tip that they were moving the highway. You could have sold the motel then, before there was a public announcement about the new road coming through. We could have bought all kinds of land over there for a song, closer to Fairvale, too. We'd have had a new motel, a new house, made some money, but you wouldn't listen. You never listen to me, do you? It's always what you want and what you think. You make me sick. Do I, boy? Mother's voice was deceptively gentle, but that didn't fool Norman. Not when she called him boy. 40 years old and she called him boy. That's how she treated him, too, which made it worse. If only he didn't have to listen. But he did. He knew he had to, and he always had to listen. Do I, boy? She repeated even more softly. I make you sick, eh? Well, I think not. No, boy, I don't make you sick. You make yourself sick. That's the real reason you're still sitting over here on this side road, isn't it, Norman? Because the truth is that you haven't any gumption. Never had any gumption. Did you, boy? Never had the gumption to leave home. Never had the gumption to go out and get yourself a job, or join the army, or even find yourself a girl. You wouldn't let me! That's right, Norman, I wouldn't let you. But if you were half a man, you would have gone your own way. He wanted to shout out at her that she was wrong, but he couldn't, because the things she was saying were the things he had told himself over and over again, all through the years. It was true. She'd always laid down the law to him, but that didn't mean he always had to obey. Mothers sometimes are overly possessive, but not all children allow themselves to be possessed. There had been other widows, other only sons, and not all of them became enmeshed in this sort of relationship. It was really his fault as much as hers, because he didn't have any gumption. You could have insisted, you know, she was saying. Suppose you'd gone out and found us a new location, then put the place here up for sale. But no, all you did was whine. And I know why. You never fooled me for an instant. It's because you really didn't want to move. You never wanted to leave this place, and you never will now, ever. You can't leave, can you? Any more than you can grow up. He couldn't look at her, not when she said things like that. He couldn't. And there was nowhere else for him to look either. The bearded lamp, the heavy old overstuffed furniture, all the familiar objects in the room suddenly became hateful just because of long familiarity, like the furnishings of a prison cell. He stared out of the window, but that was no good either. Out there was the wind. It was the wind and the rain and the darkness. He knew there was no escape for him out there. No escape anywhere from the voices that throbbed. The voice that drummed into his ears like that of the Inca corpse in the book, the drum of the dead. He clutched at the book now, and tried to focus his eyes on it. Maybe if he ignored her and proceeded to be calm. But it didn't work. Look at yourself, she was saying, the drum going boom, 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 and the sound reverberating mangled, from the mangled mouth. I know why you didn't bother to switch on the site. I know why you haven't been gone up to open the office, or to open the office tonight. You didn't really forget. It's just that you don't want so and someone. You don't want someone to continue. You hope they don't come. All right, he muttered. I admit it. I hate running a motel. It's always have. It's better than that, my boy. There was a few sign. There was a few. There was a sign in it. To the bin. Boy, boy, boy. Drumming away, one of the claws jaws of death. You hate people because really you're afraid of them, aren't you? Always have been ever since you were the were a little tight. Rather snuggle up in in a chair under the lap and read. You did it 30 years ago, and you're still doing it now. Hide it away under the corners of every rock, of a rock. There's a lot worse things uh, I could find that I could be doing. Your adventures told me that yourself. At least I never made wit out of it. You know, there's a lot worse that I think I could be doing. You always told you always told me to be yourself. At least I know I never went out and got into trouble. Isn't it better in improv improv my improv my mind? Improving your mind? Ha! He could sense his standing below him now, staring down. Call that involvement? You don't fool me, boy. Not for a minute. Never have. It isn't as if you were reading the Bible or even trying to get an education. I know that sort of thing won't work yet. Trash. And worse than trash. This happens to be a history of the Inca civilization. I'll just bet as I'll just bet it is. And I'll just bet it's crammed full with nasty bits about these darn savages. Like the one you had about the South Seas. Oh, you didn't think I know about that one, did you? Hide it up in your room, the way you had all the others. On those filthy things you used to read. Psychology isn't filthy, mother. Psychology isn't filthy, mother. Psychology, he calls it. A lot you know about psychology. I'll never forget that time when you talked to Daddy so much. When you talked, I'll never forget that time you talked so dirty to me. Never. To think that a son could come to his own mother and say those things. But I was watching the replay. I was only watching the re. But I was only trying to tell a certain teammate that it's when they call the Oedipus situation. Shame. Shame. Alright, let's see here. Okay, we're back here. Alright. change, boy. Nothing's going to change. You can read all the books in the world and you'll still be in the same. I don't need to listen to a lot of violent scenes, rigmarole to know what you are. Why, even an 8-year-old girl could recognize it. They did too. All of your little playmates did way back then. You're a mama's boy. That's what they called you. And that's what you were. Were, and always will be. A bright. Let's see. Why, even an 8-year-old child could recognize it. They did too. All your little playmates did way back then. You're a woman's boy. That's what they called you. See. Yeah. 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 Okay. You're a mama's boy. That's what they called you, and that's what you wrote. That's what you were. Were, are, and always will be. A big, fat, overgrown mama's boy. It was deafening him, the drumbeat of her words, the drumbeat in his own chest. The violence of his mouth made him choke. In a moment he'd have to cry. Norman shook his head. To think, to think that she could still do this with us. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna read that paragraph and then I know it back. It was deafening him, the drumbeat of her words, the drumbeat in his own chest. The violence in his mouth made him choke. In a moment he'd have to copy. Norman shook his head. To think that she could still do this to him, even now. But she could, and she was wonderful. Over and over and over again, unless what? God, could she read his mind? I know what you're thinking, Norman. I know all about it, you boy. You think. Mm, mm. I know what you're thinking, Norman, but I know all about you. Boy, more than you dream. But I know then, too. What you dream is your thinking cap. Yeah. Hmm. Alright. Alright, let's do that paragraph one more time. I know what you're thinking, Norman. I know all about you, boy. More than you dream. But I know that, too. Once you dream, you're out of it that long. You'd like to kill me, aren't you? Mm, right. You're thinking that you'd like to kill me, aren't you, Norman? But you can't, because you haven't the gunpowder, gumption. I'm the one who has the strength. I've always had it. Enough for both of us. That's why you'll never get rid of me, even if you really wanted to. Of, of, yeah. Of course, deep down, you don't want to. You need, you need me, boy. That's the truth, isn't it? Norman stood up slowly. He didn't dare distance himself, uh, to turn and face her not yet. He had to tell himself to be calm at first. Very, sub, uh, yeah. Let's see. Shit. I've got glasses in my eye. Hold on. See here. He had to tell himself to be calm first. Be very calm. Don't let. Mm. Mm. All right. Hey, John Pizza, how you doing tonight? I'm gonna put me in real quick. All right. Doing good. How about you? I'm doing pretty well. I'm kind of feeling stuck on the page, so I'm taking a drink so that way I don't get that stuff. But just starting reading Psycho by Robert Bloch, and yeah, not too bad at first. It's just the opening chapter we got going on here. Alright, we're just gonna start at the top of the page because I've kind of lost my part here. Hmm. I know what you're thinking, Norman. I know all about you, boy. More than you dream. But I know that too. What you dream. You're thinking that you'd like to kill me, aren't you, Norman? But you can't. Because you haven't the gumption. I'm the one who has the strength. I've always had it, enough for both of us. That's why you'll never get rid of me, even if you really wanted to. Of course, deep down, you don't want to. You need me, boy. That's the truth, isn't it? Norman stood up slowly. He didn't dare trust himself to turn and face her, not yet. He had to tell himself to be calm first. Be very calm. Don't think about what she's saying. Try to face up to it. Try to remember. She's an old woman, and not quite right in the head. If you keep on listening to her this way, you'll end up not quite right in the head either. Tell her to go back to her room and lie down. That's where she belongs. But she'd better go there fast, because if she doesn't, this time you're going to strangle her with her own silver cord. He started to swing around, his mouth working, framing the phrases, and when the buzzer sounded, that was the signal. It meant somebody had driven in, up at the motel, and was ringing for service. Without even bothering to look back, Norman walked into the hall, took his raincoat from the hanger, and went out into the darkness. Yep. So, a quick show of hands out of curiosity before I start the second chapter. Who here has either read the book, watched the movie, or both? I'm going to assume, or at the very least, people may have heard of the book or heard of Psycho when it comes to the movie and not the book. Um, but yeah, I personally have not seen the, I have actually have not read, well, I'm reading the book now, but I have not seen the movie. It's like an old flick. Yeah, yeah, so this is the book that the movie is based on, alright? Right? So this book came out in 1959, and within the next year, Alfred Hitchcock would direct the movie. As a matter of fact, if I was able to, I would actually do this. But there is, I would have to say, my favorite thing about, see, a number of people have, even if you haven't heard of the title, you may or may not have heard or have seen the infamous shower scene from the movie. And I say maybe because some people probably still haven't. Uh, but let me just say I'm not going to say how different it is, but there is a bit of difference between the shower scene in the movie and the shower scene in the book. We'll get to it when we get to it. We're not too far away from it though. It's literally in the first half of the book. But like I said, we'll get to it when we get to it. Uh, but for now, yeah. Uh, but let's put it to you this way. The reason why it's so different is think about how cinema was in the 1960s. You know all those gory graphic kills we got from the 1980s? Yeah, this didn't happen in the 1960s. Hell, you would not see you would not see a married couple being shown on the screen of sleeping in the same bed. They'd be sleeping in two separate beds, at least on the TV shows, if not the movies. Back then. But nowadays, you could get away with a hell of a lot worse than you could back in those days. Like nowadays, we could be. I mean, like, dude. I mean, dude. Even within the last decade, we were able to watch movies. They were able to pass movies like this one. And yes, I do have this movie, and I watched it. And currently, it is unlisted at the moment because, yeah, I'm not gonna let any kid watch it. But if you want to watch the watch along of this movie, I will gladly send it, let give it to you because I am not going to hold it up in the public for for little kids to potentially come across because this is literally the one of the number of movies no child should be watching. Seriously. And if any parent was crazy enough to let their kid watch this movie, why? Because that is not a kids movie by any means of the phrase kids movie. Not at all. Not even suitable for kids. Yeah. Anyway. Anyway, we're moving on. I want to try to see if I can read at least half, if not the whole book itself, no matter how long it takes. It's gonna be a bit difficult, but I read Because of Wind Dixie in one sitting on a live stream. This is 175 pages in this book. It's a bit of a short book compared to today's standards, but hey, it doesn't matter how it ain't the size of the book, it's how good the story is. That's how it is. That's how it should be. How fitting I say that because one of the books I have here is one of the books in this pile of books is Stephen King's It. And that book literally is over 1,000 pages. And yes, you know damn well after I read that book, I am going to be watching chapter 1 and 2 because, dude, I've heard how terrifying those movies are. More 1 than 2, but still terrifying. I want to get the fuck jump scare, dude. Seriously. Oh yeah, I'm not even exaggerating. It's literally 1,000 pages. But anyway, but that's then. This is now. Let's get back into the Psycho. Chapter 2. The rain had been falling steadily for several minutes. You know what? I'm going to turn the rain back on because the reason why I turned it off was because it was getting kind of repetitive, so I just turned it off for a moment. But now we're outside, so we can play it again. The rain had been falling steadily for several minutes before Mary noticed it and switched on the windshield wiper. At the same time, she put on the headlights. It had gotten dark quite suddenly, and the road ahead was only a vague blur between the towering trees. Trees? She couldn't recall a stretch of trees along here the last time she'd driven this way. Of course, it had been the previous summer, and she'd come into Fairvale in broad daylight, alert and refreshed. Now she was tired out from 18 hours of steady driving, but she could still remember and sense that something was wrong. Remember. That was the trigger word. Now she could remember, dimly, how she'd hesitated back there about a half hour ago when she came to the fork in the road. That was it. She'd taken the wrong turn. And now here she was, God knows where, with this rain coming down and everything pitch black outside. Get a grip of yourself now. You can't afford to be panicky. The worst part of it was over. It was true, she told herself. The worst part was over. The worst part had come yesterday afternoon when she stole the money. She had been standing in Mr. Lowry's office when old Tommy Cassidy called. Well, it's not raining anymore, so we're not raining in the yesterday, so we're stopping that for a moment. She had been standing in Mr. Lowry's office when old Tommy Cassidy hauled out that big green bundle of bills and put them down on the desk. The 36 Federal Reserve notes bearing the pictures of the fat man who looked like a wholesale grocer and 8 more carrying the face of the man who looked like an undertaker. Not to be confused with Mark Calloway, the Undertaker. But the wholesale grocer was Grover Cleveland, and the Undertaker was William McKinley. And 36,000s and 8 500s added up to $40,000. Let's think about this for a second. What was 40? Let's think about it. This is 1950, $40,000 in 1959. Does somebody want to take a quick look and see how much that would be in today's money? Because I'm kind of curious about that. Someone should look that up. Someone should look that up. How much is how much converting $40,000 in 1959 money to today's money? How much would that be? Hello, Diego. How you doing tonight? Tommy Cassidy had put them down just like that, fanning them casually as he announced he was closing the deal and buying a house as his daughter's wedding present. Mr. Lowry pretended to be just as casual as he went through the business of signing the final papers. But after old Tommy Cassidy went away, Mr. Lowry got a little bit excited. He scooped up the money, put it in a big brown manila number 10 envelope, and sealed the flap. Mary noticed how his hands were trembling. Doing good? That is good to hear. Good to hear you're doing good. Here, he said, handing her the money. Take it over to the bank. It's almost 4 o'clock, but I'm sure Gilbert will let you make a deposit. He paused, staring at her. What's the matter, Miss $500,000 and some odd cents. Yeah, that's crazy. That is crazy indeed. What's the matter, Miss Crane? Don't you feel well? Maybe he had noticed the way her hands trembled now that she was holding the envelope, but it didn't matter. She knew what she was going to say, even though she was surprised when she found herself actually saying it. I seem to have one of my headaches, Mr. Lowry. As a matter of fact, I was just going to ask if it was all right if I took the rest of the afternoon off. We're all caught up on the mail, and we can't make out the rest of the forms on this deal until Monday. Mr. Lowry smiled at her. He was in good humor, and why shouldn't he be? 5% of 40,000 was $2,000. How much money would that be in today's money, I wonder? $2,000 in today's money, I'm referring to. He could afford to be generous. Another website says 519,947. Over 500 million is crazy. I think you meant 500,000, but still, I got what you're saying. Of course, Miss Crane. You just make this deposit and then run along home. Would you like me to drive you? No, that's alright. I can manage. A little rest. That's the ticket. See you Monday then. Take it easy. That's what I always say. In a pig's ear, that's what he always said. No, you're fine. You're fine, John. You're good. Lowry would have killed himself to make an extra dollar, and he'd be perfectly willing to kill any of his employees for another 50 cents. Remember, this is back then. Probably 50 cents to a dollar was probably, if I had to guess, if it was enough to quote unquote kill somebody over it. It had to be a decent amount of money. Obviously, nowhere near the thousands, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, but Mary Crane had smiled at him very sweetly. 2K's worth 25,000. Okay, so 25,000. Not bad. Good amount of money, but almost 26,000 too. Wow, that's crazy. But Mary Crane had smiled at him very sweetly, then walked out of his office and out of his life, taking the $40,000 with her. You don't get that kind of an opportunity every day of your life. In fact, when you come right down to it, some people don't seem to get any opportunities at all. Mary Crane had waited over 27 years for hers. The opportunity to go on to college had vanished at 17 when Daddy was hit by a car. Mary went to business school for a year instead and then settled down to support Mom and her kid sister Lila. The opportunity to marry disappeared at 22 when Dale Belter was called up to serve as hitch in the army. Pretty soon he was stationed in Hawaii, and before long he began mentioning this girl in his letters, and then the letters stopped coming. When she finally got the wedding announcements, she didn't care anymore. Besides, Mom was pretty sick by then. It took her 3 years to die, while Lila was off at school. Mary had insisted she go to college, come what may, but that left her carrying the whole load. Between holding down a job at the Lowry agency all day and sitting up with Mom half the night, there wasn't time for anything else. Not even time to note the passing of time. But then Mom had the final stroke, and there was the business of the funeral and Lila coming back from school and trying to find a job, and all at once there was Mary Crane looking at herself in the big mirror and seeing this drawn, contorted face peering back at her. She'd thrown something at the mirror, and then the mirror broke into 1,000 pieces, and she knew that wasn't all. She was breaking into 1,000 pieces too. Lila had been wonderful, and even Mr. Lowry helped out by seeing to it that the house was sold right away. By the time the estate was settled, they had about $2,000 in cash left over. Lila got a job in a record shop downtown, and they moved into a small apartment together. Now you're going to take a vacation, Lila told her. A real vacation. No, don't argue about it. You've kept this family going for 8 years, and it's about time you had a rest. I want you to take a trip. A cruise, maybe. So Mary took the SS Caledonia, and after a week or so in the Caribbean waters, the drawn, contorted face had disappeared from the mirror of her stateroom. She looked like a young girl again. Well, certainly not a day over 22, she told herself. And what was more important still, a young girl in love. It wasn't the wild, surging thing it had been when she met Dale Belter. It wasn't even the usual stereotype of moonlight on the water generally associated with a tropical cruise. Sam Loomis was a good 10 years older than Dale Belter had been, and pretty much on the quiet side, but she loved him. It looked like the first real opportunity out of all, until Sam explained a few things. Hey, Lion Blade, how you doing tonight? I'm really sailing under false pretenses, you might say, he told her. There's this hardware store, you see, and then the story came out. There was this hardware store in a little town called Fairvale up north. Sam had worked there for his father, with the understanding that he'd inherit the business. A year ago, his father had died, and the accountants had told him the bad news. Sam inherited the business all right, plus about 20,000 in debts. The building was mortgaged, the inventory was mortgaged, and even the insurance had been mortgaged. Sam's father had never told him about his little side investments in the market or the racetrack. But there it was. There was only two choices: go into bankruptcy or try and work off the obligations. Sam Loomis chose the latter course. See, not doing well, a year old. Don't. Oh. Oh. Oh, that's. You know what I've heard? I've heard that if you put a phone in in a bowl of rice, the rice will soak up all that water and it will work. I don't know if it how it exactly goes, but I'm pretty sure you would have to put it in a bowl of rice or something, and the rice would just absorb all that water, and it should work again. I know this. I've been there because one time I had my phone when I was taking a shower. One time my phone fell down onto the floor of the shower, and when I picked it up, I noticed the screen was messing. I was like, "Oh shit! Oh, what do I do? What do I do?" Then I just like, well, I gotta do something. So I just put it in a. So I took some rice out because I told about that, and that's what. And so I put it in the bowl of rice, and then the next day I took it out of the bowl of rice, and it worked like a charm. Like literally, like nothing ever happened. And I was like, oh, thank God. I don't know how my father would have reacted if he found out I broke that phone like that, and if it didn't work the way I thought it was. But yeah, so yeah, you already tried that. Well, hmm. If there's like a warranty on that phone, if it's messing up that badly, you should be able to get. You should be able to either get it fixed or get it replaced. And you have like some sort of warranty on it. Hmm. Let's see, where were we? Oh yes. Sam Loomis chose the latter course. It's a good business, he explained. I'll never make a fortune, but with any kind of decent management, there's a steady 8 or 10,000 a year to be made. And if I can work up a decent line of farm machinery, maybe even more. Got over 4,000 paid off already. I figure another couple of years and I'll be clean. But I don't understand. If you're in debt, then how can you afford to take a trip like this? Sam grinned at her. I won it in a contest. That's right, a dealer sales contest sponsored by one of these farm machinery outfits. I wasn't trying to win a trip at all, just hustling to pay off creditors. But they notified me I'd cropped first prize in my territory. I tried to settle for a cash deal instead, but they wouldn't go for it. Trip or nothing. Well, this is a slack month, and I've got an honest clerk working for me. I figured I might as well take a free vacation. So, here I am. And here you are. He grinned, then sighed. I wish it was our honeymoon. Sam, why couldn't it be? I mean, But he sighed again and shook his head. We'll have to wait. It may take 2 to 3 years before everything is paid off. I don't want to wait. I don't care about the money. I could quit my job, work in your store, and sleep in it too, the way I do. He managed to grin again, but it was no more cheerful than the sigh. That's right. Rent up a place for myself in the back room. I'm living on baked beans most of the time. Folks say I'm tighter than the town banker. But what's the point? Mary asked. I mean, if you lived decently, it would only take a year or so longer to pay off what you owe. And meanwhile, I have to live in Fairvale. It's a nice town, but a small one. Everybody knows everybody else's business. As long as I'm in there pitching, I've got their respect. They go out of their way to trade with me. They all know the situation and appreciate I'm trying to do my best. Dad had a good reputation, in spite of the way things turned out. I want to keep that for myself and for the business. And yes, in the future. Now that's more important than ever. Don't you see? The future, Mary sighed. 2 or 3 years, you said. I'm sorry, but when we get married, I want us to have a decent home. Nice things. That costs money. At least you need credit. As it is, I'm stretching payments with suppliers all down the line. They'll play ball as long as they know everything I make goes toward paying off what I owe them. It isn't easy and it isn't pleasant, but I know what I want, and I can't settle for less. So you'll just have to be patient, darling. Yeah, so well, oh, okay, alright. So she was patient. So she was patient. But not until she learned that no amount of further persuasion, verbal or physical, would sway him. There the situation stood when the cruise ended, and there it had remained for well over a year. Mary had driven up to visit him last summer. She saw the town, the store, the fresh figures in the ledger, which showed that Sam had paid off an additional $5,000. Only 11,000 to go, he told her proudly. Another 2 years, maybe even less. 2 years. In 2 years, she'd be 29. She couldn't afford to pull a bluff, stage a scene, and walk out on him like some young girl of 20. She knew there wouldn't be many more Sam Loomises in her life. So she smiled and nodded and went back home to the Lowry agency. She went back to the Lowry agency and watched old man Lowry take a steady 5% on every sale he made. She watched him buy up shaky mortgages and foreclose, watched him make quick-cutting, cutthroat cash offers to desperate sellers, and then turn around and take a fat profit on a fast, easy resale. People were always buying, always selling. All Lowry did was stand in the middle, extracting a percentage from both parties just for bringing buyer and seller together. He performed no other real service to justify his existence, and yet he was rich. It wouldn't take him 2 years to sweat out an $11,000 debt. He could sometimes make as much in 2 months. Mary hated him, and she hated a lot of the buyers and sellers he did business with, because they were rich too. This Tommy Cassidy was one of the worst. A big operator, loaded with money from oil leases. He didn't have to turn a hand, but he was always dabbing in real estate, sniffing the scent of somebody's fear or want. What? Tell me you don't think the same thing at times. What do you mean? What do you mean by that, Limelight? I am not quite sure what you mean by that question. He didn't have to turn a hand, but he was always dabbing in real estate, sniffing the scent of somebody's fear or want, bidding low and selling high, alert to every possibility of squeezing out an extra dollar in rentals or income. He thought nothing of laying down $40,000 in cash to buy his daughter a home for a wedding present, any more than he thought anything about laying down a $100 bill on Mary Crane's desk one afternoon, about 6 months ago, suggesting she take a little trip with him down to Dallas for the weekend. It had all. Oh yeah, by the way, this book takes place uh, in the book. It takes place in Texas. I think in the movie it takes place in, of all places, Little Rock, Arkansas, but I could be wrong with the location of the movie version. Uh, but I know the book takes place in Texas. I think Arlington, if I remember correctly, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, it had all been done so quickly and with such a bland and casual smirk that she didn't have time to get angry. Then Mr. Lowry came in and the matter ended. She had never told Cassidy off, in public or in private, and he never repeated the offer. But she didn't forget. She couldn't forget the wet-lipped smile on his fat old face. And she never forgot that this world belonged to the Tommy Cassidys. They owned the property and they set the prices. 40,000 to a daughter for a wedding gift. $100 tossed carelessly on a desk for 3 days rental privileges of the body of Mary Crane. So I took the $40,000. That's the way the old gag went, but this hadn't been a gag. She did take the money, and subconsciously she must have been daydreaming about just such an opportunity for a long, long time. Because now everything seemed to fall into place, as though part of a preconceived plan. It was Friday afternoon, the banks would be closed tomorrow, and that meant Lowry wouldn't get around to checking on her activities until Monday, when she didn't show up at the office. Better still, Lila had departed early in the morning for Dallas. She done all the buying for the record shop now, and she wouldn't be back until Monday either. Mary drove right to the apartment and packed, not everything, just her best clothes, in the suitcase and the small overnight bag. She and Lila had $360 hidden away in an empty cold cream jar, but she didn't touch that. Lila would need it when she had to keep up the apartment alone. Mary wished that she could write her sister a note of some kind, but she didn't dare. It would be hard for Lila in the days ahead. Still, there was no help for it. Maybe something could be worked out later on. Mary left the apartment around 7. An hour later, she halted on the outskirts of a suburb and ate supper, then drove in under an OK used car sign and traded her sedan for a coupe. She lost money on the transaction, lost still more early the next morning when she repeated the performance in a town 400 miles north. Around noon, when she traded again, she found herself in possession of $30 in cash in a battered old heap with a crumpled left front fender, but she was not displeased. The important thing was to make a number of fast switches, cover her trail, and wind up with a junker that would take her as far as Fairvale. Once there, she could drive further north, maybe as far as Springfield, and sell the last car under her name. How would the authorities trace down the whereabouts of a Mrs. Sam Loomis living in a town of 100 miles from there? Because she intended to become Mrs. Sam Loomis and quickly. She'd walked in on a Sam with a story about coming into the inheritance. Not $40,000. That would be too large a sum. It might require too much explanation. But maybe she'd say it was 15. And she'd tell him Lulu had received an equal amount, quit her job abruptly, and gone off to Europe. That would explain why there was no sense in inviting her to the wedding. Maybe Sam would balk about taking the money, and certainly there'd be a lot of awkward questions to answer, but she'd get around him. She'd have to. They'd be married at once. That was the important thing. She'd have his name then. Mrs. Sam Loomis, wife of the proprietor of a hardware store in a town 800 miles away from the Lowry Agency. The Lowry Agency didn't even know of Sam's existence. Of course, they'd come to Lilla, and she'd probably guess right away. But Lilla wouldn't say anything, not until she contacted Mary first. When that time came, Mary would have to be prepared to handle her sister, keep her quiet in front of Sam and the authorities. It shouldn't be too difficult. Lilla owed her that much for all the years Mary had worked to send her through school. Perhaps she could even give her part of the remaining $25,000. Maybe she wouldn't take it, but there would be some solution. Mary hadn't planned that far ahead, but when the time came, the answer would be ready. Right now, she had to do one thing at a time, and the first step was to reach Fairvale. On the scale map, it was a distance of a mere 4 inches. 4 insignificant inches of red lines from one dot to another. But it had. Wait, when I said Little Rock, Arkansas, I think it was actually Phoenix, Arizona. That was completely random to say in the middle of reading, but whatever. But it had taken her 18 hours to get this far. 18 hours of endless vibration. 18 hours of peering and squinting in headlight glare and sunlight reflection. 18 hours of cramped contortion of fighting the road and the wheel and the dulling, deadly onslaught of her own fatigue. Now she had missed her turn and it was raining. The night had come down and she was lost on a strange road. Mary glanced into the rear view mirror and caught a dim reflection of her face. The dark hair and the regular features were still familiar, but the smile had gone and her full lips were compressed to a taut line. Where had she seen that dream, contorted countenance before? Your random stuff that says it. Um, hold on, let me read that again. Oh, you mean like the random stuff I say or do? Is that what you mean? Cause sometimes, well, let me see here. Well, I don't always. Well, let's put it to you this way. Sometimes I might be thinking of something multiple times every so often, but then again, I may have thoughts about other different things, and yeah. So it really just depends on on what it is. In the mirror, after Mom died, when you went to pieces, and here, all along, she thought of herself as being so calm, so cool, so composed. There had been no consciousness of fear, of regret, of guilt. But the mirror didn't lie. It told her the truth now. It told her, wordlessly, to stop. You can't stumble into Sam's arms looking like this, coming out of the night with your face and clothing giving away the story of hasty flight. Sure, your story is that you wanted to surprise him with the good news, but you'll have to look as though you're so happy you couldn't wait. The thing to do was to stay over somewhere tonight, get a decent rest, and arrive in Fairvale tomorrow morning, alert and refreshed. If she turned around and drove back to the place where she made the wrong turnoff, she'd hit the main highway again. Then she could find a motel. Mary nodded to herself, resisting the impulse to close her eyes, and then jerked erect, scanning the side of the road through the blur of rain-swept darkness. That's when she saw the sign, set beside the driveway, which led to the small building on the side. Motel. Vacancy. The sign was unlit, but maybe they'd forgotten to switch it on, just as she had forgotten to put on her headlights when the night suddenly descended. Mary drove in, noting that the entire motel was dark, including the glass front cubicle on the inn, which undoubtedly served as an office. Maybe the place was closed. She slowed down and peered in, then felt her tires roll over all over one of those electric signal cables. Now she could see the house on the hillside behind the motel. Its front windows were lighted, and probably the proprietor was up there. He'd come down in a moment. She switched off the ignition and waited. All at once she could hear the sullen patter of the rain and sensed the sigh of the wind behind it. You know, like what we were doing earlier. She remembered the sound because it had rained all that like that the day Mom was buried. The day they lowered her into the little rectangle of darkness. And now the darkness was here, rising all around Mary. She was alone in the darkness. The money wouldn't help her, and Sam wouldn't help her because she'd taken the wrong turn back there, and she was on the strange road. But no help for it. She'd made her grave now, and now she must lie in it. Why did she think that? It wasn't grave, it was bed. She was still trying to puzzle it out when the big dark shadow emerged out of the other shadows and opened her car door. Alright. Remember when I was talking about the shower scene earlier? This chapter, like I said, it's early in the book, and it's in this chapter. You guys ready to hear how different it's going to be? Trust me, there's going to be one difference, and you're going to be like, what? That happened in the book? What the? You know, I'm going to bet somebody in there is going to be like, what the? Wow, that's absolutely crazy. But like, maybe like freaking out 10 times worse. I'm expecting it, honestly. You guys don't know. I know what's gonna happen. You guys will hear momentarily. Chapter 3. Looking for a room? Wait, that sounds like Norman Bates. Looking for a room? Made up her mind very quickly. Once she saw the fat, bespectacled face and heard the soft, hesitant voice. There wouldn't be any trouble. She nodded and climbed out of the car, feeling the ache in her calves as she followed him to the door of the office. He unlocked it, stepped inside the cubicle, and switched on the light. Sorry I didn't get down sooner. I've been up at the house. Mother isn't very well. There was nothing distinctive about the office, but it was warm and dry and bright. Mary shivered gratefully and smiled up at the fat man. He bent over the ledger on the counter. Our rooms are $7, single. Would you like to take a look first? That won't be necessary. She opened her purse quickly, extracting a $5 bill and two singles and placing them on the counter as he pushed the register forward and held out a pen. For a moment she hesitated, then wrote a name, Jane Wilson, and an address, San Antonio, Texas. She couldn't very well do anything about the Texas plates on the car. Yeah, that's true. I'll get your bags, he said, and came around the corner. She followed him outside again. The money was in the glove compartment, still in the same big envelope, secured by the heavy rubber band. Maybe the best thing to do was to leave it there. She'd lock the car, and nobody would disturb it. He carried the bags over to the door of the room next to the office. It was the closest, and she didn't mind. The main thing was to get out of the rain. Nasty weather, he said, standing aside as she entered. Have you been driving long? All day. He pressed a switch and the bedside lamp blossomed and sent forth yellow petals of light. The room was plainly but adequately furnished. She noted the shower stall and the bathroom beyond. Actually, she would have preferred a tub, but this would do. Everything all right? She nodded quickly, then remembered something. Is there anywhere around here where I can get a bite to eat? Well, let's see now. There used to be a root beer and hamburger stand up the road here about 3 miles, but I guess it's closed down now since the new highway came in. No, your best bet would be Fairvale. How far away is that? About 17, 18 miles. You keep going up this road until you come to a country trunk. Turn right and hit the main highway again. It's 10 miles straight ahead then. I'm surprised you didn't go through that way if you're heading north. I got lost. The fat man nodded and sighed. I thought as much. We don't get much regular traffic along here anymore since that new road opened. She smiled absently. She smiled absently. He stood in the doorway, pursing his lips. When she looked up to meet his stare, he dropped his eyes and cleared his throat apologetically. Uh, miss, I was just thinking, maybe you don't feel like driving all the way up to Fairvale and back in this rain. I mean, I was just going to fix a little snack for myself up at the house. You'd be perfectly welcome to join me. Oh, I couldn't do that. Why not? No trouble at all. Mother's gone back to bed, and she won't be doing any cooking. I was only going to set out some cold cuts and make some coffee, if that's alright with you. Well, look, I'll just run along and get things ready. Thank you very much, Mr. Bates. Norman Bates. He backed against the door, bumping his shoulder. Look, I'll leave you this flashlight for when you come up. You probably want to get out of those wet things first. He turned away, but not before she caught a glimmer of his reddened face. Why was he actually embarrassed? For the first time in almost 20 hours, a smile came to Mary Crane's face. She waited until the door closed behind him, and then slipped out of her jacket. She opened her overnight bag on the bed and took out a print dress. She let it hang, hoping some of the wrinkles would disappear, while she used the bathroom facilities. Just time to freshen up a bit now. But when she came back, she promised herself a good hot shower. That's what she needed. That and sleep. But first, a little food. Let's see now. Her makeup was in her purse, and she could wear the blue coat from the big suitcase. 15 minutes later, she was knocking on the door of the big frame house on the hillside. A single lamp shone from the unshaded parlor window, but a brighter reflection blazed from upstairs. If his mother was ill, that's where she'd be. Mary stood there, waiting for a response, but nothing happened. Maybe he was upstairs too. She rapped again. Meanwhile, she peered through the parlor window. At first glance, she couldn't quite believe what she saw. She hadn't dreamed that such places still existed in this day and age. Usually, even when a house is old, there are some signs of alteration and improvement in the interior, but the parlor she peered at had never been modernized. The floral wallpaper, the dark, heavy, ornately scrolled mahogany woodwork, the turkey red carpet, the high backed, overstuffed furniture, and the paneled fireplace were straight out of the straight out of the gay 90s. There wasn't even a television set to introduce its incongruity in the scene. but she did notice an old wind-up gramophone on the end table. Now she could detect a low murmur of voices, and at first she thought it might be coming from the gramophone's bell-shaped horn. Then she identified the source of the sound. It was coming from upstairs, from the lighted room. Mary knocked again, using the end of the flashlight. This time she must have made her presence known, for the sound ceased abruptly, and she heard the faint thud of footsteps. A moment later she saw Mr. Bates descending the stairs. He came to the door and opened it, gesturing her forward. Sorry, he said. I was just tucking Mother in for the night. Sometimes she's apt to be a bit difficult. You said she was ill. I wouldn't want to disturb her. Oh, you wouldn't make any bother. She'll probably sleep like a baby. Mr. Bates glanced over his shoulder at the stairway, then lowered his voice. Actually, she's not sick. Not physically, that is. But sometimes she gets these spells. He nodded abruptly, then smiled. Here, let me just take your coat and hang it up. There. Now if you'll come this way. She followed him down a hallway which extended from under the stairs. I hope you don't mind eating in the kitchen, he murmured. Everything's all ready for us. Sit right down and I'll pour the coffee. The kitchen was a complement of the parlor, lined with ceiling-high glassed-in cupboards grouped, grouped about an old-fashioned sink with a hand pump attachment. The big wood stove squatted in one corner, but it gave off a grateful warmth, and the long wooden table bore a welcome display of sausage, cheese, and homemade pickles in glass dishes scattered about on the red and white checkered cloth. Mary was not inclined to smile at the quaintness of it all, and even the inevitable hand-crocheted motto on the wall seemed appropriate enough. God bless our home. So be it. This was a lot better than sitting alone in some dingy small town cafeteria. Mr. Bates helped her fill her plate. Go right ahead. Don't wait for me. You must be hungry. She was hungry, and she ate heartily, with such absorption that she scarcely noticed how little he was eating. When she became aware of it, she was faintly embarrassed. But you haven't touched a thing. I'll bet you really had your own supper earlier. No, I didn't. It's just that I'm not very hungry. He refilled her coffee cup. I'm afraid Mother gets me a little upset sometimes. His voice lowered again, and the apologetic note returned. I guess it's my fault. I'm not too good at taking care of her. You live here all alone, the two of you? Yes. There's never been anybody else. Never. It must be pretty hard on you. I'm not complaining. Don't misunderstand. He adjusted the rimless spectacles. My father went away when I was still a baby. Mother took care of me all alone. There was enough money on her side of the family to keep us going, I guess, until I grew up. Then she mortgaged the house, sold the farm, and built this motel. We ran it together, and it was a good thing, until the new highway cut us off. Actually, of course, she started failing long before then, and it was my turn to take care of her. But sometimes it isn't so easy. There are no other relatives? None. And you've never married? His face reddened and he glanced down at the checkered tablecloth. Mary bit her lip. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ask personal questions. That's all right. His voice was faint. I've never married. Mother was funny about those things. I've never even sat at a table with a girl like this before. But it sounds odd, doesn't it, fit in this day and age? I know that, but it has to be. I tell myself that she'd be lost without me. Now, maybe the real truth is that I'll be I'd be even more lost without her. Mary finished her coffee, fished in her purse for cigarettes, and offered the package to Mr. Bates. No, thank you. I don't smoke. Mind if I do? Mind if I do? Not at all. Go right ahead. He hesitated. I'd like to offer you a drink, but you see, Mother doesn't approve of liquor in the house. Mary leaned back, inhaling. Suddenly, she felt expansive. Funny what a little warmth, a little rest, a little food could do. An hour ago, she'd been lonely, wretched, and fearfully unsure of herself. Now everything had changed. Perhaps it was listening to Mr. Bates which had altered her mood this way. He was the lonely, wretched, and fearful one, really. In contrast, she felt 7 feet tall. It was this realization which prompted her to speak. You aren't allowed to smoke. You aren't allowed to drink. You aren't allowed to see any girls. Just what do you do besides run the motel and attend to your mother? Apparently, he was unconscious of her tone of voice. Oh, I've got lots of things to do, really. I read quite a lot, and there are other hobbies. He glanced up at a wall shelf and she followed his gaze. A stuffed squirrel peered down at them. Hunting? Well, no. Just taxidermy. George Blount gave me that squirrel to stuff. He shot it. Mother doesn't want me to handle firearms. Mr. Bates, you'll pardon me for saying this, but how long do you intend to go on this way? You're a grown man. You certainly must realize that you can't be expected to act like a little boy all the rest of your life. I don't mean to be rude, but I understand. I'm well aware of the situation. As I told you, I've done a bit of reading. I know what the psychologists say about such things, but I have a duty toward my mother. Wouldn't you perhaps be fulfilling the duty to her and to yourself as well if you arranged to put her in an institution? She's not She's not crazy! The voice wasn't soft and apologetic any longer. It was high and shrill, and the pudgy man was on his feet, his hand sweeping a cup from the table. It shattered on the floor, but Mary didn't look at it. She could only stare into the shattered face. She's not crazy, he repeated. No matter what you think or anybody thinks, no matter what the books say or what those doctors would say out at the asylum, I know all about that. They'd certify her in a hurry and lock her away if they could. All I'd have to do is give them the word. But I wouldn't, because I know. Don't you understand that? I know, and they don't know. They don't know how she took care of me all those years, when there was nobody else who cared. How she worked for me and, and suffered because of me. The sacrifices she made. If she's a little odd now, it's my fault. I'm responsible. But she came to me that time, told me she wanted to get married again. I'm the one who stopped her. Yes, I stopped her. I was to blame for that. You don't have to tell me about any jealousy, possessiveness. I was I was worse than she could ever be. 10 times crazier, if that's the word you want to use. They'd have locked me up in a minute if they knew the things I said and did, the way I carried on. Well, I got over it, finally, and she didn't. But who are you to say a person should be put away? I think perhaps all of us go a little crazy at times. He stopped not because he was out of words, but because he was out of breath. His face was very red, and the puckered lips were beginning to tremble. Mary stood up. I'm sorry, she said softly. Really, I am. I want to apologize. I had no right to say what I did. Hey, Daniel Barry, how you doing tonight? Yes, I know. but it doesn't matter. It's just that I'm not used to talking about these things. You live alone like this and everything gets bottled up. Bottled up or stuffed, like that squirrel up there. His color lightened and he attempted a smile. Cute little fella, isn't he? I've often wished I had a live one around that I could tame for a pet. Mary picked up her purse. I'll be running along now. It's getting late. Please don't go. I'm sorry. I made such a I'm sorry I made such a fuss. It isn't that. I'm really very tired. But I thought perhaps we could talk a while. I was going to tell you about my hobbies. I've got a sort of workshop down in the basement. No, I'd like to, but I simply must get some rest. Alright then. I'll walk down with you. I've got to close up the shop. It doesn't look as if there'll be any more business tonight. They went through the hall and he helped her on with her coat. He was clumsy about it, and for a moment she felt rising irritation, then checked it as she realized the cause. He was afraid to touch her. That was it. The poor guy was actually afraid to get near a woman. He held the flashlight and she followed him out of the house and down the pathway to the gravel drive curving around the motel. The rain had stopped, but the night was still dark and starless. As she turned the corner of the building, she glanced back over her shoulder at the house. The upstairs light still burned, and Mary wondered if the old woman was awake, if she had listened to their conversation, heard the final outburst. Mr. Bates halted before her door, waited until she waited until she inserted the key in the lock and opened it. Good night, he said. Sleep well. Thank you. And thanks for the hospitality. He opened his mouth, then turned away. For the third time that evening she saw him redden. Then she closed her door and locked it. She could hear his retreating footsteps, then the telltale click as he entered the office next door. She didn't hear him when he left. Her attention had been immediately occupied by the duty of unpacking. She got out her pajamas, her slippers, a jar of cold cream, a toothbrush, and toothpaste. Then she rummaged through the big suitcase, looking for the dress she planned to wear tomorrow when she saw Sam. That would have to be put up now, to hang out the wrinkles. Nothing must be out of place tomorrow. Nothing must be out of place. All at once she didn't feel 7 feet tall anymore. Or was the change really so sudden? Hadn't it started when Mr. Bates got so hysterical back there at the house? What was it he had said once really deflated her? I think perhaps all of us go a little crazy at times. Mary Crane cleared a place for herself on the bed and sat down. Yes, it was true. All of us go a little crazy at times. Just as she'd gone crazy yesterday afternoon when she saw that money on the desk. And she'd been crazy ever since. She must have been crazy to think she could get away with what she planned it to plan. It had all been seemed like a dream come true, and that's what it was. A dream. A crazy dream. She knew it now. Maybe she could manage to throw off the police, but Sam would ask questions. Who was this relative she'd inherited the money from? Where had he lived? Why hadn't she ever mentioned him before? How was it that she brought the money along in cash? Didn't Mr. Lowry object to her quitting her job so suddenly? And then there was Lila. Suppose she reacted as Mary had anticipated, came to her without going to the police, even consented to remain silent in the future because of a sense of obligation. The fact remained that she'd know, and there'd be complications. Sooner or later, Sam would want to visit her down there, or invite her up, and that would never work. She could never keep up a future relationship with her sister, never explain to Sam why it was impossible to do so, why she wouldn't go back to Texas even for a visit. No, the whole thing was crazy, and it was too late to do anything about it now. Or was it? Suppose she got herself some sleep, a good long 10 hours of sleep. Tomorrow was Sunday. If she left here about 9 and drove straight through, she could be back in town Monday morning early. Before Lila arrived from Dallas, before the bank opened, she could deposit the money and go on to work from there. Sure, she'd be dead tired, but it wouldn't kill her, and nobody would ever know. There was the matter of the car, of course. They would make that would take some explaining for Lila's benefit. Maybe she could tell her that she'd started out for Fairvale, intending to surprise Sam over the weekend. The car broke down and she had to have it towed away. The dealer said it would need a new engine, so she decided to junk it, take this old heap instead, and come back home. Yes, that would sound reasonable. Of course, when she figured everything up, this trip would actually cost about $700. That's what the car had been worth, but the price was worth paying. $700 isn't too much to pay for one's sanity, for one's safety, one's future security. Mary stood up. She'd do it. And all at once, she was 7 feet tall again. It was that simple. If she'd been a religious girl, she would have prayed. As it was, she felt a curious sense of, what was that word? Predestination. As if everything that had happened was somehow fated to be. Her turning off on the wrong road, coming here, meeting the pathetic man, listening to his outburst, hearing that final sentence which brought her to her senses. For a moment, she could have gone to him and kissed him, until she realized with a giggle what his response would be to such a gesture. The poor old geezer would probably faint. She giggled again. It was nice to be 7 feet tall, but the question was, would she be able to fit inside the shower stall? And that's what she was going to do right now. Take a nice, long, hot shower. Get the dirt off her hide, just as she was going to get the dirt cleaned out of her insides. Come clean, Mary. Come clean as snow. She stepped into the bathroom, kicking off her shoes, stooping to slip her stockings off. That's when she raised her arms, pulled the dress over her head, and tossed it into this next room. It missed the bed, but she didn't care. She unhooked her bra, swung it in an arc, and let it sail. Now the panties. No, seriously, that's what it all. Everything I read is in the book. Everything I just said is all in the book. I'm not exaggerating when I say these words. For a moment she stood before the mirror in the door and took stock of herself. Maybe the face was 27, but the body was free, white, and 21. She had a good figure. A damned good figure. Sam would like it. She wished he was here to admire it now. It was going to be hell to wait another 2 years. But there she'd make up for lost time. They say a woman isn't fully mature sexually until she's 30. That was something to find out about. Mary giggled again, then executed an amateurish bump and grind, tossed her image a kiss, and received one in return. After that, she stepped into the shower stall. The water was hot, and she had to add a mixture from the cold faucet. Finally, she turned both faucets on, full force, and let the warmth gush over her. The roar was deafening, and the room was beginning to steam up. Are you guys ready? That's why she didn't hear the door open or note the sound of footsteps. And at first, when the shower curtains parted, the steam obscured the face. Then she did see it there. Just a face, peering through the curtains, hanging in midair like a mask. A headscarf concealed the hair, and the glassy eyes stared inhumanely. But it wasn't a mask. It couldn't be. The skin had been powdered dead white, and two hectic spots of robe centered on the cheekbones. It wasn't the mask. It was the face of a crazy old woman. Mary started to scream, and then the curtains parted further, and a hand appeared holding a butcher's knife. It was the knife that, a moment later, cut off her scream and her head. I told you. I told you there was going to be some big difference between the book and the movie. There it is. In the movie, she just gets multiple stab wounds that ultimately kill her. In the book, her head goes along, her head gets taken off along with those stabbings. Remember when I said how this was 1960s? How you could probably get away with something like a beheading in a book, but not so much in the movies because, obviously they're in two very differently um, uh, they're run by two separate organizations. One that says, okay, we'll allow this, why not? But then the movie form comes out, and next thing you know, they're like, we can't do that. Yeah, you guys cannot. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not gonna let you show a woman's head being severed off her body, which they would ultimately allow in later years. It's also kind of ironic because countries like Italy, I think, they were okay with doing some crazy shit themselves. I mean, what's the best example I could think of? Zombie, formerly, which is basically we call it Zombie, but for Italy it was titled Zombie 2, because the original George A. Romero uh, Night of the Living Dead, the 1968 version, it was titled Zombie in Italy. And so they made unofficial sequels for that movie by their own hand. And in Zombie 2 in particular, there is an infamous scene from that movie, outside of the one where Eli Roth is like one of his favorite scenes in horror film history, is the zombie fighting a shark. And as he put it, he loved Dawn of the Dead and he loved Jaws, and he was a combination of the two. The zombie goes in the water, and the shark takes a bite out of him, and then the zombie grabs the shark and takes a bite out of the shark. As he puts it, what could be better than that? That's like a horror geek's wet dream. And that, but the more famous scene is the one that Tom Savini, you know who he is if you're a horror fan. Uh, he brings up this one. He's like, well, by that point they just did Dawn of the Dead. So what are they going to do? How are they going to top us? That eyeball, and the eyeball scene in question is where a zombie, where a woman was wasting too much time or something, and so a zombie arm was able to break through the wall, grab this woman by her hair, and this zombie would pull her closer to this thing of wood that was sticking out, and it would take so long with it, but But what you'd expect to happen in that moment ultimately did happen, and the piece of wood gets forcibly shoved into her eyeball. Yeah, like I said, other countries would be able to do crazy things that our country was like, yeah, we're not gonna let you do that. Nope, not gonna happen. Sorry, we refuse. We're not gonna do that. This book just had that happen. Remember, 1959 to 1960. You would not see, like I told you before, you would not even see, you would most likely not see two people being in the same bed together on TV shows and movies. They may give a few exceptions, but more often than not, you're not going to see the couple in the same bed together on the screen at all. Not going to happen. So if they would do something like that, you would probably be thinking a beheading in a 1959 book was also not really going to happen. But as you just heard me say, looking deadpan at the camera as I say it, probably in a creepy manner because it fits, yeah, it's run by a different uh, censorship board. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Nowadays, we got books that we got some books in this thing that could allow uh, limbs being cut off happening. I already know one book that I got over here behind this wall of books that has a difference between the book and the movie in itself as well. In case you're wondering, the book it's and I'm just gonna say it anyway. The book and movie in question is Misery, one of my all-time favorite Stevenson books. But in any case, what time is it? It's about 2 o'clock, isn't it? Yeah. Oh wow, I'm surprised I got that right. So it is currently 2 o'clock. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream there. Yeah. How messed up is that? I'm gonna end the stream on after saying that somebody just died. But either way, that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna end it there. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading stream, even though I ended it on a note, on a very scary note. But I mean, it's Halloween season. I think you can forgive me for that. But yeah. So with that said, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And until tomorrow, this is Force Walpole signing off.